Good evening. Welcome to Employment Law Today. I'm your host, Eric Sauver. I'm an employment law and business law attorney at the law office of Eric M. Sauver. I also bring you this podcast and talk radio show every Tuesday night from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the goal of my show, Employment Law Today, is to basically help small to mid-sized businesses out there as they try to navigate this pandemic. We have guests who talk about issues involving employment law and business law matters, along with additional issues that many businesses currently struggle with. And so, in that spirit, tonight, I'd like to welcome for a very pertinent discussion during these times, a special guest of ours, friend and colleague, Brian Califano. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Eric. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here.
Wonderful. Glad to have you as well. I'll give you a much more proper introduction with your background and so forth in just a moment. But before I do, I thought I would perhaps discuss or at least announce the topic of tonight's podcast for those listening and watching at home. And so our episode this evening is about financial forecasting and budgeting for businesses, planning for the pandemic and beyond. And Brian and I had a conversation about this topic. And Brian, as I mentioned, is an outsourced CFO, and I'll get to his company in just a moment, as you can see on the screen there in his backdrop. But the purpose here, the topic rather tonight is as follows. As we approach the first anniversary of the United States going into lockdown, quarantine, and full-on COVID-19 pandemic mode, this issue of budgeting and financial forecasting for business owners has never been more relevant. One of the many services that Brian Califano and his company, Accelerating CFO, offer include analyzing a company's financial revenue stream, budgeting resources accordingly, and forecasting and planning strategies for how a business ought to operate in a best case, routine, and worst case scenario. And arguably, folks, in the last year, I'd say we'd all agree this could have been the worst case scenario for many people. So Brian will discuss with me tonight some of the common mistakes that companies make in not financially planning for worst case scenarios. And he'll also describe and offer some outline of solutions that he and his company, Accelerating CFO, provide for small to mid-sized business owners. So with that backdrop and topic in mind, I wanted to now introduce Brian in a little bit more, again, formal and proper fashion, because Brian has an impressive background here of experience and knowledge and expertise. My guest tonight, as mentioned, folks, is Brian Califano. Brian's a CPA, MBA, and outsourced CFO. Brian is the co-founder and managing partner of Accelerating CFO. And Accelerating CFO, LLC, provides fractional CFO services for businesses with revenue between $1 million and $40 million in all industries, with a focus in entertainment, media, and technology. They empower companies to maximize their value and expand their cash flow by increasing the transparency of their financial statements and performance, and they offer financial guidance and expertise to entrepreneurs and business owners who want to focus more time on adding value to their customers. In terms of Brian's background prior to and including up until the present, after more than 20 years in senior financial positions at McGraw-Hill Financial, Viacom, the National Hockey League, Computer Associates, and Kaplan, and after successfully leading a $260 million IPO for a live music entertainment company, Brian co-founded Accelerating CFO LLC in 2013. Since founding Accelerating CFO, he has participated in several $100 million of capital raises, recapitalizations, and acquisitions and disposition activity. Brian is a certified public accountant in New York State and earned his MBA, pardon me, in finance and from the Stern School of Business at NYU. Brian enjoys spending time with his wife and high school sweetheart and two adult daughters, as well as playing cards, reading Stephen King novels, and hoping the Mets win the World Series. All very impressive, especially the last part there. So once again, Brian, welcome to the show. Good to have you.
Thanks again, Eric. And yes, I agree that the most important thing you said in my bio was that the Mets need to win the World Series. So I'm really hopeful this year, but we always get hopeful at this time, don't we?
Yes, yes, and I'll keep my fingers crossed for you. I root for the underdog
Absolutely.
as well a lot, so for sure. All right, just wanted to get into it perhaps with this initial question. If you can tell us a bit more about yourself, and maybe if I could add something to that mainly, in terms of how were you inspired to found your company, and are there any additional services that perhaps I didn't mention in my intro that you'd like to expound upon?
Yeah, so thanks, Eric. And I would say that what really inspired me was you mentioned in my bio that I helped lead a $260 million IPO launch for a live music entertainment company. And in my role in doing that, one of my primary roles was conducting due diligence on the acquisitions that we were performing on the various places that we purchased. We consolidated, rolled it out to on NASDAQ. But I dealt largely, and we were dealing with multiple acquisitions at the time, all ranging between 10 and $25 million in revenue. And one thing I realized when I was doing the due diligence, and again, I was on the buying side, not the selling side, was these companies, these entrepreneurs didn't have somebody like me on the other side of the fence at advising them on the business operations. Yes, they had a CPA and they would give them tax advice, but they weren't giving them practical operational experience of, what's it like when you join a publicly traded company? All the things that you got away with, quote unquote, got away with when you were a small company private, it all gets put under a microscope and lights are blasted upon it when you do operating expenses, when you go public. And nobody was there to give them that practical experience, nor were they given the practical experience of when you go public, you have to hold on to your shares for 6 months. There's a lockup period. So there's a lot of things that I felt that, again, my obligation was to the company I was working for at the time. But I just felt that, why wasn't there anybody there helping small business owners? And when I was doing my research as we were going through the IPO, I realized that there wasn't anybody out there doing it. So like most ideas that come from germination, it comes out of necessity, right? So I figured, all right, once we finished our initial public offering, I negotiated my buyout with my old company, and I just started from scratch, starting the company that we did. I opened up with a colleague of mine who had similar experiences and had similar time thinking that he wanted to help smaller businesses. Because what really energized me after being, for lack of better words, in the ivory tower for the companies that you mentioned in my prologue, and I'm not going to repeat them again, but they're all well-known names, and they were great experiences. I learned so much from there, and I added value there as well. But what I realized was there was a playbook there. There was finally something that, for somebody in my senior finance roles, something I could do entrepreneurial to kind of, scratch that itch, if you will, and at the same time provide a real value for smaller businesses that they weren't currently reaching. The kind of experience that that I've had with the companies that I worked for, small businesses could never afford it if it was a standard rate of a consulting firm. So by making it more affordable and dividing it into fractional parts of a CFO instead of hiring a full-time CFO, I was able to, help devise a playbook for our employees and our clients so they can adopt the best practices and procedures for a Fortune 500 finance and accounting company without all the overhead and everything else that came with it. So adding that value has helped small business owners look at their business more analytically, prepare for everybody's ultimately selling their business, or at least disposing of their business in some way, shape, or form, and being more intelligent about how they run their business, I think, is the best way. Many business owners run by their seat of their pants, to put it nicely, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when something doesn't seem right, or you're trying to convey to your employees and the people that work for you that something doesn't seem right, by saying it doesn't seem right, it's harder to convey the issue when you have hard facts and figures and KPIs and other stuff behind it. So that's what really got me going. We've been doing this for 8 years now. When I say we, my co-founder and I, my business partner, we're having a lot of fun. It's a lot of work, but we enjoy it really a lot because we feel that by working with small business owners, it really is the majority of the business jobs that are created, wealth that's done. And when you talk about the American dream, in my mind, that's what that means, is when you work with them. Again, no disrespect to the big organizations that I work for and that continue to be out there. But for me,
Sure.
being where the rubber hits the road is really what I enjoy and love, and gives me inspiration every day to get up and really attack work.
Yeah, wow. And that's really, I think, talking about, some good, virtuous, and also, pragmatic reasons to be in a field that you see a need, right? You saw it, you just, sought to fill it with your company. And I share your, that sort of, I had that soft spot in my heart too, Brian, for the small business. I mean, I do work for, employment law, business law services for mid-sized companies as well, but a lot of my clients are smaller businesses. And there's something about, they're very hungry and they're hardworking. And so to give them the benefit of, in your case, I'll keep the focus on you because you're our guest tonight, but to give them the benefit of your fractional CFO services, as you mentioned, without their having to spend money that they probably do not have or cannot afford on an entire CFO with full-time with an in-house team. I feel that satisfaction because I know that my clients, many of them do not perhaps have the resources for a full-time in-house counsel, but will call upon me to do their compliance, their employment law issues to handle, and so forth. So I definitely hear that, and the idea of seeing a need and filling it that came from your big firm experience. So all interesting, all good background. Good to know about you, about your company, and yeah, and I think another question I was thinking about, and I know we're coming up on a commercial break, so I'll put the question out there for you to ponder, and then we can maybe go from there. We have a little time to get into it, perhaps, but
Yeah.
what were the most? I'm wondering. So we've all been in this COVID pandemic for a year now. It seems that we're coming up with the year anniversary.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what were the most common mistakes that you saw companies make in terms of failing to plan or failing to budget for a worst case scenario. So just wanted to think about that for a moment as we come upon our first commercial break. And just to remind those at home listening tonight, you're here with me. I'm Eric Sauber, host of Employment Law Today, here with my guest, Brian Califano, outsourced CFO with Accelerating CFO. And so why don't we tackle that next question when we return from these messages? Folks, stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc, now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays, 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you interested in having a better relationship with yourself, others, and God? Greetings. I'm your host, Dr. George Andow, for the show, A Journey Through into Awareness. On my show, we journey into the awareness that the mind of God is the true seat of our personal consciousness. We join together each Monday at 7 p.m., so tune in on Talk Radio NYC.
Did you know that nearly 1 in 5 adults in the U.S. battles mental illness? Hi, my name is Albert Daba. I'm the host of the show Extra Innings. Extra Innings, I discuss the topics of wellness, mental health, and the experience of surviving multiple suicides within my family. Listen live every Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern to Extra Innings for discussions with sports figures, artists, mental health professionals, and many others. That's Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Hi, I'm Graham Dobbin. Join me every Thursday evening for the Mind Behind Leadership here on talkradio.nyc. We speak to people from business, sport, military, and politics, all around what makes a great leader. The personal experiences of what's worked and, maybe more importantly, what hasn't worked. So that's 7 o'clock every Thursday evening, the Mind Behind Leadership here on talkradio.nyc. Listen to real stories of real leaders.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Good evening. Welcome back to Employment Law Today. I'm your host, Eric Sauver, from the law office of Eric M. Sauver, employment law business law attorney. I'm here tonight with my special guest, Brian Califano, CPA, MBA, and outsourced CFO with his company, Accelerating CFO. And so for those that may be joining us late, we were discussing our topic tonight, which is we're approaching the 1-year anniversary of the pandemic and all of its implications for business owners. And we're talking about how a company might essentially forecast and plan accordingly for worst case scenarios going forward. And Brian's been sharing about his experience as well and what motivated him to start his company. So before the break, I was just about to ask Brian a question. I didn't want you to get cut off, Brian, with a 2 minutes or so. So let me just rephrase that or re-ask that question one more time. So wondering, what were the most common mistakes you saw companies make in terms of pre-COVID, that is, in terms of failing to plan and budget for a worst case scenario?
Yeah, I think, small business owners, I think I would put it into two buckets. I think the first one was they didn't have a fundamental process to budget and forecast. They just wanted to keep on improving, whatever that meant. They just, their idea of success would be doing better than the previous month or comparing prior year to current year. And as long as they were doing better, they were fine. If they were doing worse, they understood why and they kind of dealt with it. So they were more reactive than proactive. Mm-hmm. And the power of doing the budget and forecasts at the beginning of a year is being able to say to yourself, okay, this is where I see my company in the next 12 to 15 months. This is where we need to be and where we need to guide ourselves and how we're going to do that. A lot of times owners know, but they don't necessarily communicate it out. But during the budget process that we do at Accelerating CFO for all clients, we sit down with the owner. We also sit down with the heads of the various business key functions. So whether it's sales, back office, marketing, manufacturing, shipping, et cetera, we'll bring everybody in the room and say, what are the key drivers of your expenses? Try to document it, what it's going to be, instead of just saying, well, we want to grow 5%. So everything across the board goes up 5%, because that's not true. Because, for example, if you're going to double shipments in e-commerce, it'd be simplistic just to say that costs are going to go up double. They may go up a little bit more because now you're doing e-commerce and you're delivering it to consumers versus wholesalers. There's an incremental cost impact to that. That's not 5%. Maybe it's 7% or 8%. So now, if you want to have the growth that you want, you may have to grow sales by 10%. So if you don't flesh all these things out within a company and with all the key people that you have helping you run your business, you're going to miss out on a great opportunity to both make your financials more transparent to both the owner as well as to the rest of the organization, but also understand the key drivers of what's going to happen. So when shipments are down for the month, you can say, all right, well, we're going to lose 20% on our 20 points on our gross margin percentage. Can we make it up somewhere else? Or if you see that shipment that's not going to happen, or if you do see a shipment that's going to happen, what does that mean for the rest of your results? And if you can see that coming, you can plan and forecast and say, all right, let's plan ahead. Let's look at our cash flow. Do we have what we need, et cetera? And, it helps to alleviate a lot of the stress for the business owner, and it makes everybody feel like they're part of things and they're making when you see the impact of what's going on, it creates a more cohesive team union and make things more documented and make things more, again, I keep using the word transparent because I think it's important. When it's all in an owner's head, there's a lot of things that go wrong, ranging from not being a good communicator to, life happens. And if he or she is not around to run the business, who's going to convey that message? Who's going to continue with the mantra of the business or the mission statement? And if it's all in one person's head, it's not going to happen. So the budget and forecasting process puts it all on paper, gets it out of the owner's head onto documentation that everybody can watch and follow. And when you can track success or failure that way, it's hard to dispute. It's hard to dispute when the numbers are the numbers.
Yeah. I think what you're saying, I hear three. You mentioned the word transparency, certainly, and the importance of that. I heard three words in my head came out from what you were saying, Brian. Transparency, right? Clarity, because that's to be clear, focus on what the numbers are, what they represent. As you mentioned, a higher number in one area might impact the company differently than the company might think. But also I heard cohesiveness, right? So that you mentioned what struck me from what you said a moment ago is how your company, Accelerating CFO, has your clients sit down with, you said, the many different people, different, let's say, departments. And I can see why, because I think sometimes business owners might not even realize that while it's good to have separate sections and segments, to have compartments and departments that handle different aspects of the business, that ultimately the business comes together as a team. And it's one unit, cohesive unit in the end. It's not the sum of all its individual parts doing their own thing. I find that I know with employment a lot of times where one department, say, is not communicating with the other department, and it could be problematic for the owner, let's say, is unaware of a certain policy that's been in place that violates labor law, for example. So I definitely can see the value in that. So in terms of common mistakes companies were making in failing to plan, would it be, it sounds like perhaps failing to see the relevance and significance of what certain numbers meant, and perhaps or maybe failing to have a proper backup plan if things went wrong? With those also things you saw? Or
Yeah, there was a couple of things, right? So I think documenting it, I think many companies did not do that. And I think the other thing is that they didn't do what I call a sensitivity analysis, which I would say, if you grow by 10% or 25%, what does that mean for your overall cost structure? What does it mean for profitability? What does it mean for headcount? What does it mean for these costs? And looking at that, and also taking the converse. What happens if your revenues drop 25%? What if your one big customer decides not to buy from you this year, right? So I always do a best, worst, and most likely scenarios by just tweaking where you're going to grow. So if you're planning on growing 10%, what happens if you go 30%? Or if you plan on 10%, what happens if you do 25%? And it's funny because every time, every once in a while when people say, well, what's worse than 25%? I always call that doomsday, the doomsday budget, and I never until 2020 had to do anything other than, joke about it. And unfortunately, it came to life for, I can say easily, all of my clients, and one of the things, that I think this pandemic taught my clients and emphasized in my head was the idea of really, when you budget, it's not, to say it's all going to be, rose-colored glasses, looking at the world, that's good. And most entrepreneurs are positive, optimistic people, and you want them to continue to do that way. And it's really important that they are. And obviously, to do what we do as an entrepreneur is you have to be optimistic, because a lot of times when you get kicked in the teeth so many times or rejected, it's the ability to get up and keep going. However, it's important to acknowledge that there may be times when things aren't going your way. And if things don't go your way, it's important to correct and make sure you keep your compass going north, right? To make sure you continue going down the path. So one of the things that happened, as when I reflect upon the year anniversary of this pandemic that we're going through, one of the things that, I don't want to say I'm proud of, but one of the things that really sometimes when you do stuff in theory and then it happens in reality, it kind of reinforces that maybe you're doing the right thing. Well, in this case, by doing what I was just saying about the sensitivity analysis, when things started going sour, people started realizing it, believe it or not, in late February, right? So for my clients that were getting shipments from China, China's ability to ship was impacted because they were doing a shutdown. So we had the practical instance of, okay, we can't get our stuff to us this week. So what does that mean to our clients? All right, well, we have to start communicating out and making sure that we have alternative suppliers. So we started looking at that. That was initially part of the issue. It was like, okay, let's allocate some of this out, which we had already looked at previously because of various policies that was going on under the then Trump administration with tariffs, which again, so we had something in place or an idea in place because we talked about these things.
Right.
Once COVID hit, then we realized, oh boy, like, all right, so this is impacting what was then, looking back very naively, just one country or one region. So we would say, all right, well, let's allocate out to the production so we keep our business going. And then as it started evolving over a couple of weeks. Now it's like, okay, now we said, well, what do we got to do? Well, we already had a blueprint. We already had the worst case scenario.
Yes.
I mean, it turned out that in some of my clients' cases, it was much worse, but at least we had something to turn to. We had something to say, look, we've talked about this, we unfortunately have to endure this, but let's look at the worst case scenario. What happens if our sales goes down 25 or 50%?
Right.
And for many of my clients, and with you in employment law, right? You were probably very busy.
Oh, yes.
All of a sudden, the new word of the month was furlough versus laying off.
Yes.
And there was a lot of discussions with HR people and employment lawyers like yourself and saying, what do we do? I mean, nobody, obviously, we all lived the history and we all felt that it was only going to be a temporary thing, 2 weeks, 2 months, it kept on evolving, obviously, to where we are today. But nobody wants to let people go. And especially in a small environment like we all operated in the small, medium business community, nobody wants to let people go. So we all wanted to maintain hope. So we all said, look, we needed to furlough people, but we did it in a responsible and a respectful manner. We told people, and we were upfront with them. They were, and listen, everybody was experiencing this, and nobody was ever like, how can you do this to me? Everybody was kind of like, all right, we get it, but don't worry, this is going to be a temporary issue. Once things turn around, once we open up again, we'll let you back in. We're going to maintain benefits. So if you have families and stuff, we're not going to leave you go. We're not going to leave you high and dry.
Right.
And I think everybody was able, but what was impressive, I guess, was that we were able to identify quickly which employees were mission critical for the new sales targets and which ones were, again, not directly related to revenue. So, you have to segment into like what's revenue generating, what's not, just for survival mode, right? Now, as this is happening, this is before PPP and all the other stuff that started evolving. So, you had to react. And one of the things by having a blueprint of a worst case scenario, I mean, it wasn't exactly what we planned, but at least we had something that we can say, all right, if we're going to maintain margins, if we're going to have only 4 shipments coming in from a certain part of the world, so then who are we going to sell it to? So all of a sudden the conversations became, how do we maximize our cash flow today? And if you don't have that blueprint, if you don't have like a potential way of dealing with it in the event that that would happen, then you're running around like scared, and all of a sudden you're up all night trying to figure out what to do. Well, in a way, by doing the budget and forecasting in a non-pressurized situation where you're thinking clearly and you got everybody in a room, 6 months before it happens, now you can you can rationally pursue a plan. And I think that's the biggest impact for what happened this year. And for many people, the ability to pivot, was critical. I mean, I have clients that were actually more profitable last year than they were in the previous year in 19 because of their ability to pivot, because they had, the business cycle, which was very consumer based instead of, wholesale based, for example. So people were able to adapt. And I think that's, again, being able to do that, thinking about it rationally and thinking it through, because you had issues to flesh out in front of you, it made things a lot easier to adapt. I mean, yes, people's jobs were in some cases never recovered, but in most cases they did come back eventually. I think it was, and again, it made people feel more respected, right? Because I mean, if you typically get laid off, it's not fun. But in the manner that it was handled and communicated, I'm very proud of all my clients for the way they did it and how we did it responsibly.
And I'm sure, well, you should be. I mean, I heard a lot of good things there that are really worth highlighting and unpacking a bit. And of course, we do have to take a commercial break. It seems as if that's like maybe the edge of suspense where there's like a really good point that I'd love to either make or that you just made or a question, but we do want to hear from our sponsors. So folks, I'm Eric Sauver, host of Employment Law Today. I'm here tonight with my guest, Brian Califano, co-founder managing partner of Accelerating CFO. We're having a great conversation here, so stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy and Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
Do you run or are ready to open your own business? Hi, I'm Jeremiah Fox. I've been operating and opening small business for the last 25 years, and I'm the host of the new show, The Entrepreneurial Web. Tune in every Friday at noon Eastern Time for insights and stories on the nuances of running small business right here on Fridays at noon, talkradio.nyc.
Hi, I am Joseph Franklin McElroy, host of the new podcast, Wise Content Creates Wealth. It airs on talkradio.nyc every Friday afternoon from 1 p.m. to 2. They say content is king. Well, wise content rules the world. Every episode features tools and tips for content marketing and business people telling the wise content stories of that success. Tune in every Friday from 1 p.m. to 2 on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
I think I may have been unmuted there. Sorry, folks. Welcome back to Employment Law Today. I'm your host, Eric Sauver. I'm here every Tuesday, 5 p.m. on Talk Radio NYC, where we discuss issues affecting small and mid-sized business owners, particularly during this pandemic. And so Brian Califano, our guest tonight of Accelerating CFO, has some great topics, really great talking points and great things you mentioned just now, Brian, in the last segment. And before the commercial. And I just wanted to sort of expound on that a little bit, if I may. You had some really interesting nuggets there worth perhaps taking out and looking at before getting to another question. The question that I asked you about when I asked what some of the most common mistakes you saw companies make in terms of failing to plan for a budget for worst case scenario. And you talked about what your company did for your clients to help them, right, to forecast and plan, and how having this blueprint gave them the ability, some of them, the ability to pivot and to be better prepared when the bottom fell out, when things were going awry. I also heard you talk about entrepreneurs generally being optimists. And I found that with my clients as well, right? They look to what should go right, could go right, and will go right. And as you pointed out, that is a great attitude for an entrepreneur, for a business owner, for somebody who's starting a business or running a business to have. But what I heard is that, and I tend to find this too, one can be optimistic and hopeful about the future. One can have hope and be positive and still be mindful of and aware of the potential, right, for the negative. It's like, right, you hope for the best and plan for the worst. And what I found is that, just sort of like some observations here, that maybe perhaps something that you and I might see with our clients is that I think some companies might be hesitant to talk about and address worst case scenarios, almost perhaps a little bit of a superstitious mindset that if I don't talk about this or think about it, it won't happen. And I think that's very much a part of human nature. I mean, I have colleagues who work with their wills, trust, and estates attorneys, and they talk about how people call them up and say, my wife and I have two small children. We're 40 and 42. We'd like to have a will, and then they don't follow through. And I think it happens a lot. And I don't think it's because of his abilities. You know, he's a very smart attorney, very sociable, and good with his clients. I think people are just afraid to address worst case scenarios. So I appreciate part of your message that I got from what you do is how important it is to plan for the worst. And also keep in mind that the worst can look very different. I mean, a pandemic might come along once a century, but as you pointed out, if one of your clients had a fire in the warehouse or lost the partner or the owner had a heart attack, that could be like their own personal pandemic, if you will, their own catastrophe. So really the importance of this planning is really something I think to note. So appreciate all that. Just want to point that out there from your last, what you were saying. This is what I got from it. And and I want to ask you, a question, if I may, just about sort of the PPP and applications and factors that folks might consider. There are second rounds of PPP.
Yes.
I've been counseling my clients on it. So I guess I'm wondering, what type of questions have your clients had, and how have you been helping them from the CFO's perspective around PPP loans?
Right. So obviously, with the first draw of the PPP, and what's made it extra complicated is that the rules, even as of the date of this podcast, they continue to change and evolve, which impacts hugely on both the business and the personal finances of an individual worker.
Yes.
Because it has a lot of impacts, like I was saying earlier, by furloughing or terminating individuals from job positions. That has an impact on the ultimate calculation that's going to be forgiven by the government. Now, there's been lots of changes of what is acceptable for forgiveness of expenses versus what's not forgivable. What's acceptable is a payroll cost. So what I've been providing for my clients from the beginning is kind of like, what lawyers do all the time, which is interpreting law and then guiding your clients in the best way. What makes it more difficult is A, I'm not a lawyer, and B, this was happening in a way that was like real time, and what was famous, especially over the summertime, is that if there was a change to be made, the SBA and or the Department of Treasury was doing it on a Friday night at 10 p.m. and they would publish the rules. And then I'd have to read it over the weekend, and then my clients would be like, "What?" And I felt personally responsible for doing it because, I mean, this was we're talking about their livelihood. We're talking about, battling for the survival of their company and the jobs associated with it. So that was a major factor in what we were doing during this time period. Now, for companies going through the PPP right now, there's two things going on. So the first one is forgiveness of the first PPP loan, which is going to be based upon a number of factors, numerous which I'm not going to bore our listeners or you with, but it's going to be largely dependent on a couple of things, primarily what your staffing levels were pre-pandemic and throughout the pandemic or the period, the recovery period that we're using to calculate what's forgivable or not. These are all calculations that I've been working with all my clients. And if any of your listeners after this call want assistance, I'd be happy to do that. We'll talk at the end about contact information. So we'll do that. But in the meantime, this is what I was doing for my clients, is figuring, okay, this is what we can use, and using the funding. So we were getting the funding first, right? The government gave it to us first, and then later on the forgiveness calculation, which keeps on sliding back and back in terms of a deadline that needs to be filed. I mean, we're getting close to the end now where it has to be done for the first draw. Right. What's impactful in the second drawer is The first draw, presumption of need was assumed for the most part. I mean, there was a lot of bad press about companies that had that took the maximum amount of $10 million. They were larger companies, and it wasn't in the spirit of what the PPP was supposed to be. Although they didn't technically, violate any rules, they got a lot of bad press. So, but for everybody else, it was the presumption of needing it was already there. For the PPP2, which was what was published in December, it was different. Now you had to prove monetarily that you had a 25% decline in revenue in any given quarter and or for the entire year. So there was a little bit of a calculation going on, but as an additional wrinkle in this, the government said that even if you have 25% in a given quarter year over year, where there's a revenue decline, if you ended up having an overall positive year and you're still applying for the PPP loan, we're gonna probably review your application and see if whether or not you really needed this. So the presumption that they gave us in the first draw was not there in the second draw. So now the government's saying, look, you may have just eked the second quarter decline, but did you make a profit overall? Did you really need these funds in order to keep everybody employed, or was it more of a timing thing? So there's a lot more judgment in number two. And, I'm helping clients work through this, struggle with, do I ask for it? Am I entitled to it or not? And it's tough because, listen, if you brought your employees back and everything's going fine, maybe you don't need to, to fold the loan or not. So it's not as clear cut. So it takes some guidance both on, from a CFO like myself, as well as lawyers. I think, on the employment side, what are you really signing up for? You have to be very careful on the second draw.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, what's funny is when you said, I don't want to bore the listeners or me with the details, kind of chuckled because I read these, the updates and the printouts, on a regular basis. And so I was nodding along. I've been reading in all the different publications. So definitely I don't find it boring, but I appreciate how you wanted to give, people just like the main gist of it. And you're right. People can get I've had clients who get very caught up in the hyper technical details. And I say, you know what, I'm happy to, of course, explain that to them if they want to know. But if they're really getting frustrated, it's like, let me worry about that. And we'll just, look at the employment law implications. What's interesting about this is that you're right. The PPP, the second time is going to be a little bit tougher. Not so much, I don't think, in terms of loan forgiveness, but in terms of showing that you're eligible and how much you're eligible for. As you mentioned, that presumption of eligibility that we saw in 2020 has been a little bit more scrutinized and rolled back. So, but that really brings up also, I think you made an important point, Brian, that this situation should really be looked at from many different angles. You've got the CFO, right, looking at the company now, looking ahead. So if you do get this PPP money, for example, how do you best spend it to increase revenue? How do you cut costs? How do you also do that while making sure that your maximum amount of your loan is forgivable, right? So you're spending it on the approved expenditures to be forgiven. And if you're not forgiven or you're spending on other things, well, it's still right at 1% interest loan, pretty low at a 5-year, I believe, payout. So is that a factor? I look at the furloughing, and I had a lot of calls from businesses. Perhaps they spoke to CFOs like yourself first and accountants, and they were doing the furlough. And what they had to be careful of there was, okay, if your company is not so diverse or has a history, let's say, of allegations of discrimination, even if unfounded, eventually or not proven to be true, then you have to be extra careful, right? I mean, right, which people, who are you laying off? Which workers? Is there a disproportionate impact on your female workers? You're laying off anyone that can't work X number of hours, and more of your female workers are home now, homeschooling their children on Zoom. So, I think it's very much a symbiotic relationship between the CPAs, CFOs, and attorneys. So let's look at the financial implications, let's look at the tax implications, let's look at the HR, and look at the legal implications of what we're doing. So really, good stuff here. I appreciate your bringing that up. And we actually got to discuss it in full before the next commercial break, which we're going to take in a moment. So,
Yes.
folks, we got a break in a moment. I'm Eric Sauver, host of the weekly show Employment Law Today, Tuesday nights, 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. on Talk Radio NYC. I'm here tonight with my special guest, Brian Califano. Brian's a CPA, MBA, and outsourced CFO, managing partner and co-founder of Accelerating CFO. So stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Are you a small business trying to navigate the COVID-19 related employment laws? Hello, I'm Eric Sauver, employment law, business law attorney, and host of the new radio show, Employment Law Today. On my show, we'll have guests to discuss the common employment law challenges business owners are facing during these trying times. Tune in on Tuesday evenings from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Time on talkradio.nyc.
Howdy, I am Joseph Franklin McElroy, host of the new podcast, Gateway to the Smokies. It airs on talkradio.nyc every Tuesday night from 6 p.m. to 7. Every episode is dedicated to memorable experiences in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and surrounding areas. This show features experts and locals who will expound upon the richness of culture, history, and adventure that awaits you in the Smokies. Tune in every Tuesday from 6 p.m. to 7 on talkradio.nyc.
Do you love or are you intrigued about New York City and its neighborhoods? I'm Jeff Goodman, host of Rediscovering New York, a weekly show that showcases New York's history and its extraordinary neighborhoods. Every Tuesday live at 7 p.m., we focus on a particular neighborhood and explore its history, its vibe, its feel, and its energy. Tune in live every Tuesday at 7 p.m. on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to Employment Law Today. I'm your host, Eric Sauver, here tonight with my guest, Brian Califano, co-founder and managing partner of Accelerating CFO. Brian is an outsourced CFO, and his company helps businesses with everything from financial forecasting and budgeting for businesses to planning, as you've heard, hopefully, in the last 45 minutes of our show tonight. So Brian, again, it's great to have you on the show. Really a lot of excellent information and just the analysis of like what you do and how it helps your companies, rather, and your client companies is really, really good for our listeners to hear. I wanted to take a moment just for those listening tonight, maybe some business owners that know outsourced CFOs. So my question is, how does your company differentiate itself from other outsourced CFO companies out there?
So, Scott Margolin, who's my partner, and I, we have come up with a methodology and approach to how small business owners should approach the finance and accounting function. So we have what we call a playbook that we adopt for all industries. I mean, we have tweaks here and there to adopt specific key performance indicators or driving factors. But to use a football analogy, the blocking and tackling of what we do on a daily basis has the same methodology, the same approach, which is all about process, people, and procedures. And I think once you document all those procedures that you need to do every month on a close, reviewing your budget, comparing year to date or what the case may be, making sure that all your expenses are done, et cetera, that's what differentiates us from others, because I think we also adapt to our company. So when you talk about implementing anything, there's no one size that fits all. We have in our system, while it is rigid in like I said, the policies, the 3 Ps, the policies, the procedures, and the people, we do have it malleable so that we can actually change the processes to adapt to what a company's strengths are, or where their personnel resides, or wherever the case may be. So we always refine our processes, but we keep the methodology all the same. other people have only one way of doing it, and if you can't adapt to it, then you can't use them. So, for example, some people will say, well, we can only do QuickBooks, or we can only do Xero, or fill in the blank on GLs. We say, what is it? We can handle it. So our clients do everything from QuickBooks to NetSuite to Mass 90 to all the other GL applications that can be done. So we don't say no, we just say we can get it done. And we just don't mouth those words, we take it seriously. And the other thing that differentiates us as well, which is important to Scott and I, is that he and I have a personal relationship with all our clients. So what I mean by that is we have controllers and we have consultants that work in certain ways, but we're what we call the throat to choke. So clients can always reach out to us. They can always turn to us to find out the key strategic matters that are important to their business. Sometimes in other firms that do ours, they like to delegate out to other companies, and there's no real standardization behind it. We have a standard process that Scott and I have learned from working at companies over the past 20 plus years, and we've taken those best policies and we've adopted it this way. We've come up through the ranks from the ground up. There's different paths that CFOs can take. Our paths kind of mesh together. So some people come up through the accounting side, which is kind of like, a controllership and using debits and credits. And others come up through the finance side, which is kind of like business development and mergers and acquisition. Scott and I have had the unique and the blessings of having both experiences in our previous experiences at the other companies prior to starting this company. So we bring the best of both, and we can meld it all together. And we've seen both sides, and that perspective and value that we add to our clients is something that most firms can't provide.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's, great to articulate that and to convey that to our listeners, because I think having a multifaceted approach based on different but complementary experiences can be really helpful. I know I try to bring my experience to my clients. I represent employers mainly, some employees, mainly employers, but I started out exclusively as a plaintiff side employment law attorney and labor and so forth. So I know how plaintiff attorneys think, how they operate, what they're considering besides what they're saying, and can bring that as well with my defense work. So I definitely hear how that having that multifaceted approach can be very helpful, and having different experience can be beneficial. Also good to know that, for those listening tonight, if they have an issue they want to talk to you about around budgeting, forecasting, the PPP, just good business sense, that you guys have a process and you do have some standards, some methodology, but it's not rigid. Like what I'm hearing from you, what comes to mind is structured, but not like too rigid, so that you can adapt. You mentioned the word malleability.
SAT word.
Yes, right. There we go. Anyone out there, with teenagers?
That's the most extensive word I'll use today.
Right. Okay. Yep. So, got to use it somewhere, right? So.
Yeah, exactly.
It's good to do, But yeah, I mean, I think that it's that people understand this, because a lot of businesses might gravitate towards a company that might not have that open-ended approach, or they might think, well, if outsourced CFOs only work with one entity or one type of program like QuickBooks, I need to then change my whole company. So I hear you say, no, we can say yes to what you need, which I think, is a common thing for us as those that came up perhaps and then had a passion for working with small business. You talked about how your clients can reach you, a personal touch, which again, kind of like tugs at my heartstrings, because I share that as well when I approach my clients. But I'm keeping the focus on you here. So I want to, you've clearly, I think, laid out tonight a lot about what you do. We've got about 3 minutes to the end. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to give you 2 minutes or so just to wrap up with your contact information, anything else you want to share about upcoming events, and I'll take a minute to wrap up the show. So the floor is back to you. It's all yours, Ryan.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you for your time, and thank you, listeners, for listening. I want to offer two things. Number one, anybody who has any questions about what we do, most times I will offer, well, for all our listeners today who mention your name or mention this broadcast, We're going to be doing a free diagnostic on your company's financials, which means we will do an overhaul about where we think there's issues and stuff and how we can improve cash flow, budgeting and forecasting, as well as your reporting. So I will, so all listeners out there today, we'd be happy to do that. You can reach me at brian@acceleratingcfo.com, or you can use info@acceleratingcfo.com as well. In terms of what other things that I've been doing, I've been spending a lot of time now on M&A, and I know I would think that a lot of your listeners may be thinking about selling your business. If you reach out to me again at either Brian@acceleratingcfo or reach out to us at info@acceleratingcfo.com, we have a broadcast of what companies need to be doing. I participated in a panel just today, as a matter of fact, about what companies need to be doing to prepare for a sale. And there was a great conversation with myself and some personal wealth individuals about how to handle that unique aspect that many entrepreneurs strive for and will experience many times only once in their lifetime. So for anyone reaching out there, I'd be happy to pass along that video, that podcast, the video of it as well, where we talk about different things, and that can give you a different perspective of what you should look for in the M&A process. So that's my PR, but thank you very much for your time. It's been great. This is a great venue. You do a great job, Eric.
Thank you,
this
Brian.
time has flown by.
It really has, and it's flying very quickly. We have about 30 seconds to wrap up. So I just want to take the time, Brian, to say thank you so much for being on the show. You're listening tonight to Employment Law Today. I'm your host, Eric Saubert, employment law, business law attorney. I'm here Tuesday nights, 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. I'm here with Brian Califano of Accelerating CFO. If you liked our show, come back and tune in next Tuesday at Talk Radio NYC. So again, wishing everyone a really happy, healthy rest of the week and a good night. And Brian, thank you once again.
Thank you, Eric. Be well, and God bless.
Yes.